There are over 700,000 sexual offenders in the United States alone. With all the social media these days, how can we protect ourselves and our children from these despicable predators?
Welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast, where we discuss criminal cases that involve some factor of abuse. Our goal is to spread awareness of abuse that could be taking place around any of us and encourage everyone to take responsibility and report if they see a child or an adult being abused. Sheila LaBarre was a woman that had never had the best of luck with relationships. After 3 failed marriages, she had been working for Bill Labarre and living in an apartment above his dental practice. But sadly, Bill Labarre suddenly passed away at the age of 74. He was survived by his daughter, Laura Melissy, and his son, Greg LaBarre. But his entire estate somehow ended up going to Sheila LaBarre, who had taken his last name, even though they were not married. She moved into his $1 million farm, and there she had 2 more boyfriends, Michael Deloge and Kenneth Countie, both of whom had apparently left her, but their families hadn't heard from them since they left Sheila. After police received a missing person report for Kenneth Countie, they also received a strange phone call from Sheila. They heard her yelling at Kenneth, calling him a pedophile, and he was agreeing with her. Then they heard him vomiting. Because they had done a few welfare checks on him in the past, just to have him tell them to go away, they weren't too quick to respond. But 6 p.m. that evening, they made their way over to Sheila LaBarre's farm. So welcome to the Voice of the Victim podcast. I'm Ryan, and this is part 2 of Sheila LaBarre. So if you haven't heard part 1, go back and listen to episode 14 before you listen to this one, because it'll lay out the groundwork for this entire story. So go do that. We're joined by Kate from Ignorance Was Bliss in these 2 episodes, episode 14 and 15. She actually had an interaction with Sheila LaBarre, so it's very interesting. And if you haven't yet, go listen to her show, because she has a conversation with us about Sheila LaBarre, going down rabbit holes and telling us about her interaction. So after you're done with this episode, be sure you do that, and hope you enjoy the rest of this episode.
When the police arrived, nobody was home. They cased the joint and found some interesting things. First, in the front yard, there was a burnt mattress and a box spring. Near that, they found the yellow fuel tanks that she had just gotten at Walmart. They also found piles of hay that were smoldering and burning, and in those piles, they came across a shockingly disturbing sight. What was that, Ryan?
Well, they saw a bone that they were pretty sure was a human bone, still with meat on it, sticking out of one of the hay piles. And while they were looking at it, Sheila got home and came up behind them suddenly, and immediately they asked her about the bone, and she seemed unfazed by it. She said,
"This is one of my favorite quotes of all time. It's either the bone of a rabbit or a pedophile. I don't know." I adore that. It's fantastic.
Yeah, where do you need to be? What place do you need to be in to just slip that in there?
Yeah,
I mean, either or, right? It's either a rabbit or a pedophile. It's like they're playing Mad Libs.
Yeah, not much of a distinction between the two.
It seems like they're in different categories, but
I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, okay, give me a noun. All right, another noun. Now give me an adjective. My goodness. Okay.
Sheila didn't want the police to take this bone away. She was apparently really protective of it, and they
attached.
Didn't. Yeah. And so they left to go obtain a search warrant. And I'm sorry, but if you find a human bone in a pile of hay, to me that seems like probable cause. Well, where they wouldn't need a...
It was obviously not from a rabbit. I mean,
yeah.
A rabbit the size of a bunny.
Yeah.
They don't have that big of bones, do they?
No. I think that bone was bigger than an entire rabbit. But...
I don't think so.
Well,
actually, I don't think it was that obviously human.
No.
Oh, really?
You know, like, I mean, if you think about, like, the bones that are in your hand compared to the bones of a rabbit's leg.
Oh.
That's true. I'm thinking like a big femur.
Yeah. Well, it was hard
no,
to
it wasn't
tell
like
in
that.
the video.
Right,
The
no,
size.
it wasn't like that. And so the police were stymied. I mean, there are really limiting rules. Okay, New Hampshire, live free or die, right? Sometimes the emphasis is on die.
Interesting.
Is that their state quote?
I swear to you, that's what's on all of the license plates.
Funny.
Well, it is America.
America, yeah, live free or die. Yeah.
Well, at least the police got their warrant on the same day, just to search the exterior of the farm. Sheila was in her kitchen holding a handgun, and she was covered in ash and soot. That'd be a little bit concerning
Yeah.
if you're a cop.
I wonder if she was covered in ash and soot before they went to get the search warrant.
Oh, this was a new getup after they came back?
Yeah, this was once they came back with the warrant. Lieutenant Michael Wallace and Chief George Dodge were there, and she told them that she'd burned a pedophile, which sounds like a confession. And this part's really creepy and weird, but she told them that Ken was in a bag. And they questioned her a little more, and she's like, he's in the Walmart bag.
I love that. I love that it's in the Walmart bag.
Ugh. So how is she so casual and nonchalant about this?
The police asked if she would come down to the station for questioning, and she agreed. As they left, they took her loaded pistol away. They wanted to verify that she didn't have any more weapons. When they asked her, instead of saying no, she pulled up her shirt and flashed her breasts, then started to take off her pants, but they told her to stop. They brought her in and interviewed her, and during the interview, she handed over a suicide note she wrote before they showed up to her place. It talked about Countie being a pedophile and a drug user, and that he threatened to kill himself and left the farm.
Yeah, it's weird how she said that the bones were from a pedophile, but then she says Countie was a pedophile, but that he left. So she's contradicting herself, saying that she didn't kill him now.
Mm-hmm.
After this interview, they let her go home. They didn't arrest her or keep her in custody, even though they found a freaking human limb on her property burning under the hay and a guy in a bag.
2 days later, on March 26th, they returned to her house with search warrants for the entire property. They had hundreds of cops sweeping her huge property. They collected a ton of evidence. They found a knife with blood on the blade, blood splatter in the kitchen, living room, dining room, 2 bathrooms, and a bathtub. And let's not gloss over this part. They found human bones and teeth. Even more creepily, though, there was evidence of older burn pits and blood spatter old enough to have layers of dust on it.
Ugh. Well, there's no accurate body count because of the type of men she would target, people living off the grid with no family that would notice them missing. But another 2 days later, on March 28th, you'd think that Sheila would be in the police custody because they had just found an overwhelming amount of evidence. But she was free, and she decided it was time to ditch Epping. She took out $85,000 worth of cash and checks, and with that, she took off.
Huh. That must be nice.
Well, I mean,
Not that much money.
again, playing devil's advocate, you're allowed to have blood in your house.
True.
You know, you're allowed to have a bloody nose. You're allowed to whatever. You're allowed to self-harm. You're allowed to do that. You know, and other people are allowed to do that. You're allowed to have a freaking vampire party at your house if you want to. So
You are devil's advocate.
It's America.
I really am.
True.
But I mean, I live in Salem too, by the way, so there's that. But blood all by itself is not incriminating.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the bone, had they been able to grab that, would be incriminating. But even then, they didn't know in the moment that it was a human bone, and by the time they got a warrant, it was gone. Now, a lot of this moved more slowly than it should have in retrospect, but in the moment, I mean, you're allowed to have a sadomasochistic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they don't know what's going on here.
Right.
And so all of this is like, they found bones and teeth. And so she knows the clock is ticking, and she knows it's time to get out of Dodge. But they have to go through the proper channels, and they have to test everything. And if you've got
Yeah.
several different sources of blood around the house, it's going to take a little while to sort that out. And while it's getting sorted, she does a little bit of self-care in terms of changing her hair and that kind of deal. And she gets some cash and she takes off.
I suppose just blood isn't proof of a death.
They found bones. They didn't know what they were. And so all of this, in retrospect, is incredibly incriminating. And it's easy to look at those cops and be like, where were you? You know, you dropped the ball. And in many ways they did. But also they're hampered by, here's the rules I have to operate under. And one of them is probable cause. I cannot arrest someone without probable cause, knowing that a crime has occurred. And they're pretty sure, right? But they don't have the train of evidence to follow it yet. And they don't have a confession. Because she's known to call police and be a pain about things. She's known to call police and make wild accusations about her neighbors and about the people she's living with. She's known to wave guns around. You know?
Yeah.
And so, why is this any different?
Yeah, it's interesting to have the perspective of someone who's kind of worked on the other side of this. Because it's easy to sit here and just be an armchair detective and, you know, say everyone's doing a bad job and whatever. But they're all just people like us at work. And like you said, they got to follow the rules.
Yeah, and I'm sure, I would imagine some of the rules changed after this.
Yeah.
Sheila hitched a ride with a stranger and offered sex in return for the ride. She made her way to Manchester on I-293, then to Boston, where she hooked up with yet another guy.
So she used her toolbox to get up.
You don't even need money if you're a girl or a guy.
Well,
maybe a little
you
more
know.
if you're a guy, but...
You gotta have
Yeah,
a
I think
nicer, shinier toolbox if you're male.
Yeah. Since girls are picky.
So on March 31st, the police finally obtained the warrant for Sheila's arrest, but she was already long gone.
Sheila was pretty clever. While she was on the run, she cut and dyed her hair and started going by a different name. She was hiding out in Revere, Massachusetts.
Revere.
She made the papers while she was there. The front page was a picture of her face and a headline, "Just Plain Crazy," which seems like no understatement.
Also a complete oversimplification, but thank you for helping us with the pronunciation, Kate. The Revere police recognized her face, and on April 2nd, they finally arrested Sheila LaBarre. And now we want to pause to share another podcast with you that we think you might enjoy if you like our show.
I'm Mo Blackwell, the host of Targeted, True Crime, Domestic Violence. We'll investigate one case of family violence each season using academic research to interpret the events so that we can become better advocates. Join us as we spotlight the death of 4-year-old Militia Gibson from her stepfather's abuse, delve into her family situation, break down the trial of her parents, and examine how her murder in 1976 led to changes in social service departments around the United States. Is there something we can learn about family violence through examining her murder? I think there is. She wasn't the only one in the house who was being abused.
This is Murderous Minors, Killer Kids, bringing you the frightening and truly insane tales of children with the thirst to kill. Kindergarten through 12th grade murderers. True stories thoroughly researched. Join us weekly for new tales of parents' worst nightmares on Murderous Minors, Killer Kids.
And now back to the show.
Once she was finally in custody, they got some more info on Sheila. She told them more about her relationship with Kenny. She said that they were lovers. She had actually renamed him to Adam Olympian LaBarre.
Olympian.
That's a very classy, strong name right there.
Yeah.
Olympian.
Seems kind of ironic since he was in a wheelchair.
Yeah. But at some point, she says he confessed to her that he was a pedophile. Sheila hates pedophiles. She says that she ended their relationship then and there. She said Adam Olympian Labarre, or Kenny, went to bed on March 21st, and when she woke up, he was gone. She told police the reason she was burning the mattress was because she'd slept on it with a pedophile. So I guess you could make that fight, or,
Yeah, if that's what she truly believed.
Yeah.
It's possible.
She did not. Sorry.
I was playing devil's advocate a little bit, too.
Yeah, but she did not.
She also said that maybe Kenny Countie had fallen into the fire. Just maybe. She denied harming him. Yeah, exactly. A little bat of the eyelashes there. She denied harming him, but also said that she didn't feel bad that he was gone. After some undoubtedly intriguing and annoying interviews with Sheila, they finally charged her with first-degree murder of Kenneth Countie with no bail.
Suddenly, she seemed to change her tune, and she surprisingly admitted to 2 murders, but pled not guilty by reason of insanity.
Really?
I think we can tell by Sheila's past how she orchestrated her retirement plan around stealing Dr. Labarre's estate from his family. That she seemed pretty capable.
Well, either way, she decided to go with the old crazy lady act to get an insanity plea to stick.
So, the trial began on May 13th, 2008. Her defense attorney was Jeffrey Denner, and he somehow got psychiatric reports showing that Sheila was actually insane and not an evil manipulative genius. So, during the trial...
You can be both. Don't limit me, right? I mean, seriously.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, you can be. Why can't you?
Don't ask me, I don't know anything.
I'm looking at you like you should know.
So, during the trial, some interesting things came out about Sheila's past. Her defense psychiatrist said that Sheila was abused as a child and projected her own experience onto her victims. She would apparently try to convince the men that they were pedophiles that had been victims of incest in the past.
Sheila would record herself interrogating and berating these men. The jury was able to hear these tapes in her trial. A forensic psychologist, Malcolm Rogers, was working for Sheila's defense, and he testified that these tapes showed she has either a schizophrenic affect disorder or a delusional disorder that caused her to believe that men were pedophiles even if they weren't.
Yeah, and then she would kill them, putting herself in the position of a, quote, hero. And this expert also said Sheila believed that she had died in the past and was sent back to Earth with a mission to kill pedophiles, and that she was an angel with special powers.
Yeah. Interestingly, the story doesn't line up with what she told the state psychiatrists.
Yeah, for Sheila, it was really important that people viewed her as sane.
I believe that she tried both. She, on the one hand, wanted to appear insane because her lawyers told her to. Mm-hmm. Because she believed their line that if we can get you into the state hospital, it's a better stay and maybe you'll get out as compared to the state prison. And we can talk about that, but it's inherently not true. And I have been in the state hospital. I have seen what it looks like in there, and let me tell you, you would rather go to prison.
Really?
Okay, so she had not been given the option of taking a tour of both. She just sort of believed that line that she was fed. So there's that. There's also, it's called image management. Okay, and we all do it. It's trying to behave in ways that you think other people most want to see you, right? So, You know how you behave differently at work versus at home? You know, or around your mother versus her mother, or whatever it is, you know? We all do it. And Sheila sounds like she did it to the nth degree. That she really, it's not different personalities. It's always just Sheila at the heart of it.
Kind of a facade based on who she's with?
It's an act of control. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really, you're not only trying to control what other people do, you're trying to control what other people see and what they think. And so, when you are in jail waiting for a trial, there's a lot of boredom and a lot of downtime and a lot of anxiety and wondering what comes next. And jails are not safe places. Compared to prisons, they're very different. and it's noisy and it's scary and you just don't know what's happening next. And she strikes me as the type of person who would have felt a lot of loss of control sitting in jail. And so now when she sits down with the psychologist, she's in a quiet room and they're asking very sort of scripted questions and they're giving very structured tests. And now she's like, all right, I'm in control now. Bring it. Let's do this. And it feels better. And she probably was coached a little bit by her lawyers to an extent of make sure this guy finds you crazy. And so she probably could have done that with her defense psychologist because she would have been given like very specific sort of times when she would be seen and when things would happen. But the thing about the prosecution psychologist is that by and large, the defense psychologists are paid per case, whereas the prosecution psychologists are just paid by salary. They're state employees. And so you can just go wander the ward whenever you want to. You can just sit there. And then the patients or the jail inmates, whichever it may be, you can wander the jail also, they may just, you become invisible. They don't see you anymore. They may literally not see you. You may just be looking through a camera at them. I don't know how it's set up. But the moral is, if you're putting on a facade, it's easy to do for an hour or for 4 hours even. The block of time that you're with somebody and you know it. But it's really, really hard to do it 24/7. And so if she knows, because suddenly she recognizes this person, like, oh, this is the person who saw me on the ward last week. They know I'm not crazy. Well, I might as well just be me then. Because I think she was fairly smart. And so then in that case, it's like, all right, you know what? Let me put myself in the victim role. That's the only thing I got left. Like, I can't be crazy. I might as well go for the pity. And I think that's what she did.
Interesting.
Yeah, if one thing doesn't work, you might as well just keep going and try the other.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. She's very smart, very resourceful.
And that's why it was so hard for me to figure out where I landed on this case, because she did seem to have so many different personalities or stories that she would have based on the sources. So Sheila told Dr. Albert Dructinus, the state psychiatrist, that she killed Michael Deloge because he was harming her rabbits and had said he wanted to kill her too. So in response, she says she chased him into the house and cornered him in the kitchen and grabbed a chain and started to beat him with it. He survived this beating, but he was bleeding from his head, and she says she told him to go to the hospital, but he refused and said he deserved to hurt because he was evil. So he made his way to the couch and he laid there for 2 weeks, but he didn't get better, and then he died on the couch.
Wow.
So, like I was just saying, her stories seem to be all over the place, because before she said he left and never came back, so...
Well, in another interview, she described the day Kenneth Countie died. One morning when she woke up expecting him to be laying next to her, he wasn't there. So she got up to look for him. As she was looking around the house, he suddenly ambushed her and began choking her with his hands. She struggled and got out of his grip. Well, at this point, she says that he told her he'd only come to the farm to steal her money to buy drugs for his drug habit. They got into a heated argument and started to fight, and ended up in a bathtub where he apparently slipped and hit his head. This was a quote from her interview. "He just stared up at me. He just didn't move. I started CPR on him. I didn't know what else to do. I was screaming his name. I tried everything, and in a second or two, I immediately started CPR on him. I used to be certified years ago. I did the best I could." End quote.
Yeah, and her reason for burning his body was to give him, quote, a kind of Native American funeral.
Was he Native American?
That's a good question.
Or was she?
I don't know.
She was co-opting. She was pretending.
Yeah.
Sort
Okay.
of pulling from... but, I mean, no. She wasn't using a Native American ceremony.
It worked for the situation.
No.
Okay.
So everything we just said is according to Sheila's testimony. We don't know if it's exactly what happened, but she basically claimed his death was just an innocent accident during self-defense, and that she ended up burying his body instead of reporting it to respect a Native American culture. So what happened to the pedophile killer sent back from the dead that she had
Claimed to
talking
be.
about before? Well, the state psychiatrist, Dr. Albert Jucktinus, contradicted the defense expert and said that she was sane after more than 12 hours of interviews. He testified that she answered her questions well, she tried to explain evidence away, which makes you look bad, and this is not what someone sees over many hours in a person who is psychotic. And he also stated that she could have been faking or exaggerating symptoms of mental illness. So it pretty much goes along with what Kate was just talking about.
Yeah.
That based on who she was talking to, she did what she thought they wanted to hear.
Right. He also pointed out how her actions didn't go along with being an angel with a moral duty to kill pedophiles. Instead of just killing them, she baited them and then brought them back to her house. She lived with them, cared for them, and slept with them before torturing and killing. Accusing her victims of pedophilia may have given her an excuse to kill because she's sadistic and that's what her aim was, to be sadistic.
And that was a direct quote from the psychiatrist.
Exactly.
The prosecution attorney, Jim Buffetti, told the jury she knew what she did in both murders was legally wrong. She made careful decisions to conceal her crimes and systematically destroy evidence. And you can't argue with that. Buffetti also said that she isn't insane, but sadistic. She taunted, tormented, and tortured both men as part of her sexual perversion. So these poor, desperate, and helpless men were probably so caught off guard when she would finally turn on them and start this weird torture routine to try to convince them they were pedophiles, and she would use weapons to dominate them. Thankfully, the jury agreed with the prosecution and they found Sheila guilty, and at age 49, Sheila LaBarre was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole.
Well, there was another interesting factor that wasn't introduced in the trial, but apparently it didn't need to be. During the investigation, they were sifting through the old burn pits on the farm. The investigators discovered toe bones, but they didn't belong to Kenny or Michael. So, if she didn't also kill the owner of these toes, they at least left the farm without their toes.
Which I don't think is too likely. So I
Oh,
think
look, we all have our collections, right? You know, some people collect like salt and pepper shakers, you know.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just collecting toes.
A burn pile full of
Toes.
toes.
I'll just take
What can
your
I
toes
get you
and
guys
you
for
can go
Christmas?
on your way.
Toes.
But I think it's safe to say that there's another unidentified victim, which makes Sheila a serial killer. And I really wish that I knew whose toes these were, and I wonder if their family is missing them and has no idea where to look, you know?
Well, yeah, probably.
That's just a really creepy thought to think that there might be a family out there who's missing someone and they were another victim of Sheila's.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey Denner, Sheila's defense lawyer, had some interesting comments about Sheila during the process. He said that she was a very sick woman who told the prosecution's psychiatrist that she was indeed sane. But Denner and her other lawyers wanted to use the insanity defense because they truly believed that she was insane. He said, "She wanted to be sane, but she was the craziest person I ever met. When the verdict was read, she collapsed in my arms and said, 'Thank God, they know I'm sane.'"
So, Sheila had a sister named Lynn Nugent. She was 4 years older than Sheila, and she provided a lot of testimony during the trial. According to Lynn, during Sheila's first marriage, we mentioned that Sheila had attempted suicide, and she did this by overdosing on prescription drugs and driving her car into a ditch. And Sheila was taken to a hospital and put in the neurological ICU, and she was in a coma for around 8 days. And then they took her to the psychiatric ward, like we mentioned earlier, in the hospital, and stayed there for about a month. During the time she was there, she told her sister that she had to fight for her life, regularly warding off sexual attackers. And when Lynn talked about this incident, you could hear Sheila crying in the courtroom.
Is it possible that she is abused literally everywhere she goes? Or is she actually perceiving any kind of interaction as sexual advances? If she was abused as a child, it is possible that it made her extremely paranoid about these future abuses and maybe perceive bad intentions that aren't there.
Yeah, that's an
I think it's choice B there, yeah.
Yeah. So during the trial, Lynn Nugent testified about an incident that happened way back when they were little girls, where Lynn and Sheila were sitting in the back seat of their family's car, and something had happened that made their dad really angry. And he got out of the car and tried to punch through the window, but it was already down. But he was punching so hard that the force of his punch threw his body into the car, and he landed on top of their mother. They used this opportunity. Sheila and Lynn scrambled out of the car and started to run away. And their father got loose and chased after them as they ran. And then he grabbed a metal can of antifreeze, which Lynn described like a can of paint thinner, so like it would hurt. It was full and heavy, she said, and he threw it as hard as he could at Sheila and hit her in the head. And she had put her hand up to block it, but it didn't really help, and she ended up actually just hurting her hand as well. As Lynn was giving this testimony, she was really starting to struggle as she told about this next part, when her father tried to pick up the can again.
Sheila was screaming and crying, and their mother was running away. As he bent down to get the can, Lynn jumped on his back and tried to wrestle him down so that Sheila could get away. Sheila and her mother were able to run around to the other side of the house, and Lynn ran towards a cornfield. It was late and dark, and he chased after her, but she dove into the cornfield and rolled a few times and laid quietly, trying to hide from her father. She heard him rustling through the cornstalks looking for her, and then she heard him walk into the house and start kicking the side of the house in anger. Lynn waited a bit longer and started whispering, trying to find her mother and sister. She found them in the cornfield. They started walking towards their brother Jimmy's house, who lived about 5 miles away.
Yeah, this was all shared in Lynn Nugent's testimony, and it also included times as a child when Lynn suspected her father had sexually abused Sheila, and another man that had also sexually abused her. She went on to say it was common knowledge that Sheila was sexually abused as a child.
And she said that when Sheila was a young adult, she had the nickname Crazy Sheila because of her erratic behavior toward men and her cackling laugh.
Sounds scary to me.
Well, throughout the next 20 years, Sheila's behavior got more bizarre and she put on weight and became even more paranoid. Her sister also testified that Sheila often talked about how she was reincarnated and in her past life she was a witch or a clairvoyant person and that she had lived in Salem.
Which is where Kate's from, right?
Woohoo! That's where I live now, yeah.
So this is kind of an interesting, because we had talked about before how she believed she came back from the dead and became an angel of pedophile killing. So she believes she lived in Salem and was a witch or a clairvoyant person, so...
Okay, and I'm not going to go off on the whole thing, but none of the witches lived in Salem, none of the judges lived in Salem, it didn't happen here. Just saying.
So, Sheila's lawyers in the trial really tried to show that Sheila was indeed insane when she killed Kenneth Countie and Michael Deloge. And Brad Bailey, her attorney, said Sheila thought they were pedophiles and also believed there were people in the woods near her house who were out to get her. So, could this have been something to do with the incident her sister described with their father? I don't know. But based on the way I'm looking at it now, like Kate was talking about, I mean, she could have just been trying to sound insane for these people and just making up all kinds of crazy crap.
And Bailey also talked about how Sheila believed she had been a witch and died and came back as a pedophilia killing angel. He said, "This is a woman who sincerely believes that she has been told by God himself, even though she's died, to return to earth to find a reason why. A woman who truly believes she is an angel, a spirit walking among the living, who has returned to earth for a special purpose." He also said that Sheila believed that because she was a notary, she believed that gave her special powers and allowed her to judge people and enact her own punishment on them, including executions.
I don't know of any other notary who believes that officially signing documents and preventing fraud goes hand in hand with capital punishment and judgment, but
Well, now you
she
do.
really had her lawyers buying into this stuff.
Well, or they knew what to say to the press.
I think that was probably it. Bailey also said Sheila believed her house was haunted and she was physically assaulted by ghosts. Here's another instance of Sheila perceiving herself as a victim of violence. We can't say for sure whether Sheila was insane or if she was just very clever and a good actress. Either way, Anne Rice, the prosecutor, believed Sheila had a mood disorder that gave her a need to control, dominate, and humiliate men.
I could see that after the way her father treated her.
Rice also believed that Sheila was obsessed with sex, and she had taken these men home for this reason. We see that with how, before all this went down, she would call 911 for no reason, just to flirt with the cops. Rice pointed out that her description of what had happened to her victims changed over time, and she didn't have one solid story.
There were also some interesting details that her sister Lynn talked about during the months leading up to Kenneth Countie's death. Before Kenny died, Sheila would call Lynn about 4 to 5 times a week, complaining about being so angry and worried that people were stealing from her. And in mid-March of 2006, Sheila called Lynn to tell her she was hiding under a table and Ken County would not stop looking at her with demonic eyes. Lynn could hear Sheila intermittently put down the phone and then scream at Ken, saying that his mother had sex with him and that he molested children. Then Sheila would get back on the phone and say strange things in a childlike voice.
That's creepy.
Yeah, so Brad Bailey, her defense attorney, stated, "You will know insanity when you see it, and you will see it in this case, boiling right out and over the top."
If Lynn's testimony is true, then I could buy that Sheila was actually insane. But the psychiatrist evaluated and determined that she was sane. Could it be possible she was playing her sister as well, cleverly setting up her defense before the murder? She did somehow manipulate Bill Labarre into leaving her his estate shortly before he suddenly died.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Kate?
Well, I mean, what I think is that there's a huge difference between being legally competent, you know, what they call insane, legally sane, but really what they mean is competent to stand trial, as opposed to being crazy. Okay, and you can be just batty, all kinds of crazy, 7 different varieties of it, and yet be legally competent. And in her case, I think everybody was right. I think that the psychologist said she's off her rocker. You know, that there are things she really believes, and there are ways she behaves that are just not rational to the rest of us. But, okay, so being legally sane is a really low bar, and I don't want to take up too much of your time right now with it, but basically, you have to know what you've done is wrong, and that basically means you wouldn't do it in front of a police officer. Right? You know it was bad to do. And so you have to know what you've done is wrong. You have to know who your lawyer is, and you have to know the purpose of your lawyer and the judge in the courtroom. Like, you have to know everybody's sort of role in the courtroom, and you have to work with your lawyer. That's it.
Pretty low
That's a low
standards.
bar.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, you can do both. You can be what the rest of us would look at as crazy, and yet be legally competent.
Yeah, that's really a good point. Because I never thought of it like that. But that would explain why she thought she could get away with it by acting crazy or insane, and still people being able to see through that and be like, no, you're putting on an act right now.
You know, and that was knowing, being sane enough to put on an act plays against you.
Yeah. My thoughts are, whether Sheila was insane at the time or not, she definitely has some serious issues. I mean, she killed 2 men, maybe 3, maybe 4. So let's not forget Bill Labarre and the mystery toes. I could definitely see how dwelling on the abuse that she had in her past instead of seeking out therapy could have led her to a state where she perceived sexual abuse in any situation where she wasn't personally soliciting it. and then somehow she was screwed up enough to be able to justify murder in her mind, which is scary to me. The effect child abuse can have on a person's values and goals if they allow it to is a scary thought, because she was unwillingly abused by her father, and she wasn't in control in that situation, and to me that seems like a huge factor in why she ended up the way she did.
Oh, sure, it can warp your perception. And so, I mean, you used the word control. Yes, 100% she was not in control in that situation, but she learned that sex is related to control.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so that helps form her mindset later on. And this feels normal to her. This is just how people are, what people do. Right? Like, nothing about this strikes her as weird or wrong or whatever. And so why would she need therapy? This is just how people are.
I mean, that's something we really like to highlight on this show, is the ways that abuse can affect someone's mind or their perception of the world.
Well, right. And I think one of the hardest things to do, and something that I had to do regularly at work, but also just as a human being, all of us, I think if we don't figure out how to do this, we're all up the creek, you know? It's to figure out how to have sympathy for the things this child had to experience and yet hold her accountable for her actions as an adult.
Yeah.
You know, like, I feel bad about the things she had to survive. And I feel a certain pride for her in good for you for surviving. Good for you for making it through all that stuff and getting it to adulthood. Like, so there's a degree of that there. But at the same time, you knew what you were doing was wrong. And I know this because you hid it. I know this because you told lies about it. And because you did everything you could, including run away at the end. So you knew this was not okay.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking, too, is there's such a conflict because of that. You feel sympathy for her, for what she had to deal with, and you're glad that she was able to move on with her life, but at the same time, there's a lot of people that are abused that don't end up becoming murderers, so it's a really interesting case to me.
I haven't murdered anybody yet.
Yeah.
That we know about. I mean,
You might find a couple toes in my garden, but that's all.
They're just rabbit toes. Just kidding. To end our part of the show, at least, we want to just talk about Sheila after the trial in prison, because during her prison sentence, she claimed to have been abused by staff and fellow inmates in Florida, and she said, "I am afraid and fear for my life. 2 white female staff members abused me physically and psychologically in late May 2012. I think this was in a letter to her sister. And it's ironic because Sheila had been separated from the other inmates and held in close management, which is basically like solitary, because she beat up a fellow prisoner. So she seems to have a real double standard between herself and others, because in her mind, torture and murder is better than pedophilia, and it's also okay for her to beat up other people, but not okay for them to beat up her. So,
well, and then
So
again, I don't think she ever believed that they were pedophiles. I think that this was something that she put on, that she said in hopes of getting a lighter sentence.
yeah.
You know, or of being, something. I just, that's my perception, and I can be wrong about that. Like I said, I never worked with her in a clinical level. I don't, she never shared any secrets with me, that kind of thing. But it strikes me as an enormous steaming pile of BS.
Yeah.
When she says that, it just doesn't ring true. That she thought these people specifically were pedophiles. I don't know, it just doesn't click with me as like, oh yeah, maybe she did think that. Maybe she was quite that warped. I don't think so.
The thing I wondered about is, because her sister had said that she had talked about how she was reincarnated and came back as an angel. Well, I don't know if she told her sister that, but she did say that she had a past life as a witch.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm curious whether that was before or after all of this went down. Like, if she was telling her sister that kind of stuff before she was
No, she
in
told her
trouble.
lawyers that. Or, well,
Okay.
that is what her lawyers said that she said.
Yeah. But her sister also testified that Sheila had told her that, not about pedophile killing, but about being reincarnated and being
Well,
a
her
witch
sister
in
was
her
trying to
past life.
save, she was trying to save a sibling's life.
That's another good point. Is there's a bias there in the testimony.
Totally.
I'd
So-
probably say anything to save one of my siblings.
Yeah, Sheila claimed after she reported this abuse that the staff began a cover-up instead of actually helping her, and she wrote to her sister, "This is a very corrupt prison." Her sister Lynn says she doesn't condone what her sister did, but she keeps in contact with her and sends her money. And I thought this was kind of interesting. She also became close friends with Kenny County's mom, Carolyn Lodge.
That was weird.
Yeah.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, Sheila is being held in solitary confinement. According to Lynn, who heard it from Sheila, it was because she fought over a bag of Fritos with a younger inmate. I can't think of a better reason to be in solitary than that. She
That's
also
super
said,
common, though, in prison.
Is it?
I suppose it's like the only property they have.
That's your currency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm glad I have a little bit of money then. Buy
Yeah.
as many Fritos as I want.
Not as many as you want.
She also said that she talked to Sheila about the unidentified toes. She asked Sheila if the police would find anyone else, and Sheila said no. Lynn also wondered about Wilfred LaBarre.
Bill Labarre.
Remember the guy who she inherited the entire estate from? Wilfred and or Bill. Lynn said that Sheila denied killing him, and that he was the love of her life. After that, Lynn said there is no excuse for abusing anyone in jail, even LaBarre. I know she did these awful things, but she didn't get the death sentence. I don't think it's right to mistreat anybody.
Yeah, and I understand her reasoning here, but based on Sheila's past, I don't know if I can believe she is actually being abused in prison, or if Sheila just believes that she's being abused.
Probably a little bit of both.
One more thing I want to mention before we end is we don't want to forget about the survivors of Sheila's terrible actions. Carolyn Lodge, the mother of Kenneth County, had some comments about Sheila and these new events. Sheila was writing to the paper trying to form her own story of abuse, and Carolyn says that Sheila is still trying to manipulate the public by contacting the newspaper, and she said everybody is still talking about Sheila. They get taken in by the little webs she weaves. She did it in Epping, she did it with the police, and she's still doing it 6 years later. So it's really sad that this has to keep coming up. Sheila has to keep coming up in the lives of the people who lost their family, because, like we were talking about, Sheila really wants that attention. Mm-hmm. She's still looking for it even now that she's in prison.
Well, and what she's talking about there is there's a reporter in New Hampshire. I want to say Kevin Flynn, but I'm not 100% on that. But whoever it was, there was this reporter that started writing to Sheila in jail, and ended up, this is before the trial was completed, and ended up visiting her, and she wrote back to him, and it became pretty intense,
Are we talking,
and
like,
actually
toolbox
crossed.
related?
Well, no, she was in jail, but certainly, he did visit her, I guess, and it crossed lines.
Okay.
Like, he ended up being called to testify through part of the trial.
Oh, yeah.
And it just generally went over the edge. I want to say that this was in Criminal, the podcast Criminal, but I can't.
Oh.
I don't remember for sure. I binged Criminal like 2 years ago, so I've lost details. But, I remember this blowing up. Anyway, when we lived in New Hampshire, about this reporter who ended up sort of crossing journalistic lines. Because as a
Interesting.
general rule, you want to keep things definitely at arm's length or more before the trial is done.
Yeah.
Because once you're called as a witness, you really can't continue reporting because it's just the lines get squirrely. And so this guy, Kevin Flynn, ended up writing a book about it. And because of that, it has kept Sheila's name in the spotlight a lot longer, I think, than it might otherwise have.
Oh, okay.
I haven't read it in a long time, but it's a decent book. It's interesting because it includes her letters, so you hear her voice.
Mm-hmm.
You should get that.
Yeah, that sounds interesting.
I know this is a little off topic, but do you have to be married to have conjugal visits?
There are not conjugal visits in New Hampshire.
Oh, well, that answers that.
There you go. Will you tell us a little bit about your interactions with Sheila?
Do you want to do sort of a closeout, and then we'll go down some of the rabbit holes?
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for listening to the Voice of the Victim podcast. Yeah, it was a really interesting case.
It's definitely been a ride.
Yeah, and thank you, Kate, for being on the show with us. Go definitely listen to her show, Ignorance Was Bliss. It's a really interesting perspective on the world, and it really makes you think a lot. So you can find us on Twitter at VOVPod, on Instagram at VOVPodcast, and you can email us at VOVPodcast@gmail.com. And
check out our Patreon because we just got some really cool new merch.
Oh yeah, we got some mugs and stickers and
postcards and magnets.
Yeah.
You'll be dazzled.
And we've also set a goal of 100 patrons, or wait, was it $100?
Dollars.
And once we reach that goal, we're going to share Rosie's personal story on our show. So help us cover the costs of running a podcast, because it's not free. And when we reach that goal, we're going to share Rosie's story. So thank you for listening again, and we'll talk to you next time.